but a number of them had prophecies of days of darkness, 3 days of darkness, clergy against clergy, final days, fireball from the sky, end times. Write this: before I come as the just judge, I am coming first as the King of mercy. Before the day of justice arrives, there will be given to people a sign in the heavens of this sort. All light in the heavens will be extinguished, and there will be great darkness over the whole earth. And then Christ said that he himself would penetrate the darkness. I was not only fascinated by people who bore these marks of Christ, but they were visionaries, and many of them had prophecies. And there's a lot of consistency in the prophecies, especially about days of darkness, and in some cases, 3 days of darkness.
By the way, my name is Joe McClane. I host a radio program called A Catholic Take, where we look at the world through a Catholic lens. I'd love for you to hang out with us. If you like it, give it a thumbs up and let us know what you think in the comments below. Today, on this day, the day that we're recording this conversation, marks the 800th anniversary of St. Francis receiving the Stigmata. St. Francis, not your patron saint of zookeepers and bird baths. He was the pretty rock solid, hardcore guy. It's just an amazing thing to think back on St. Francis starting an era in the church, in the history of the church, that brought hundreds and hundreds of stigmatists. In fact, there's a brand new book out published by TAN, The Stigmatists, Their Gifts, Their Revelations, Their Warnings, by Dr. Paul Kengore. And we're going to be linking to the book in the notes today. But Dr. Kengore joins us this morning. Good morning to you, Dr. Kengore. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, Joe, it's good to be with you again. I love your show. Thanks.
I love the book. It's a great book as usual. You write great books, but there's a couple of reasons why I like the books. And it's not, this one is not the obvious one. It's not the usual suspects that you're going to talk about in this book. St. Padre Pio, my patron saint, St. Francis. It's the less than usual subjects. You introduce us to new characters in this book that we didn't really know about. And I think that's very fascinating. But I got to tell you, it's the section on the 3 days of darkness that's worth the price of admission. And I want to get to that here in a moment. Let's start with the stats first. Give us the stats, which you start in the introduction of your book, on the stigmatists. Who are they? What is the common thread?
Yeah, so altogether in history, now it's really hard to come up with like a single approved authoritative list, right? And one of the reasons I did this book, Joe, is that I'm an academic, right? I'm a scholar. Call yourself a scholar almost seems like, kind of prideful, right? But yeah, but that's what I do. That's what I do, right? I'm an academic. I'm a professor. I try to write these things from a scholarly point of view, and you read a lot of sloppy stuff on different websites, things that you don't know if you can believe. 3 days of darkness is one of them, right? What does this person believe? What is it? Did they really say that? So, to our knowledge, we don't know that there's a Vatican-approved running list of stigmatists. There have been several different studies that have been done. There's a group in Belgium, a center that actually tracks stigmatists. They've done it off and on for a few decades. There was a study done by a French doctor toward the very end of the 19th century, around 1893, 1894. It's a book done by Michael Fries, who's an academic, that was done fairly scholarly a few decades ago. So probably in total, about 400 to 500 stigmatists in history, okay? And that would be starting with St. Francis. Now, some people believe that Paul, the Apostle Paul, St. Paul, who in Galatians says, I bear the marks of Jesus Christ on my body, right? The stigmata, the marks. So some people think that that meant that he was the first stigmatist. Now others say, well, if you read on, Paul talks about being shipwrecked, flogged, and whipped, and all this other stuff. He could just be talking about suffering in general. But two stigmatists who were major visionaries, Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich and Therese Newman, who died in the 1960s, they had visions of past events and the Blessed Mother, Jesus, the life of Jesus. In fact, Anne Catherine Emmerich was a major visionary who helped inspire Mel Gibson's The Passion, right? They both claim to have been able to see and know that St. Paul was, in fact, the first stigmatist. But other than him,
Doesn't
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
doesn't St. Paul himself in Galatians 3 basically say, "Oh, you foolish Galatians, before whose eyes Jesus was publicly portrayed as crucified"? Could that also be a veiled reference to his own stigmata, since he in the same letter he talks about having the wounds of Christ in his flesh? I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and it very well could be, right? I mean, there's a lot of insights we get from these people. In fact, Anne Catherine Emmerich, Therese Newman, a number of others. When we talk about the wounds, the marks of Christ, people think of the hands, right, bleeding in the palms and the feet, even the sides. Some cases on the head, a cross of thorns. Saint Rita of Cascia was gifted, as she put it, with a single thorn. But what a number of them have said is that in their talks with Jesus and in their own experiences, the most kind of troublesome, painful mark that they had was a shoulder wound. And Jesus told them in their visions with him, apparitions, they believe, that was his worst, most painful wound. And when you think about Christ telling us that if you want to follow me, you need to pick up your cross and follow me. I find that kind of spiritually profound. That it would be the shoulder wound that would be kind of the most impactful. You know, the heaviest cross, the heaviest burden to bear, if you would. So yeah, jumping from Paul in the first century, you have to go basically to St. Francis, who we're talking right now, September 17th, 2024. It's the 800th anniversary of Francis receiving the stigmata. So he's usually considered, aside from Paul, the first stigmatist. And then after that, you get quite a number down through the centuries. Catherine of Siena, who was lived from 1347 to 1380, died at the age of 33. A number of these stigmatists died at the age of 33. Cath yeah, yeah, Saint Faustina Kowalska, 1905 to 1938. And she and Catherine of Siena both had hidden stigmata, which I'm sometimes hesitant to bring up, Joe, right? Because, we're all so skeptical, right? Hidden, oh, come on, I don't believe it unless I can see it, right?
Right.
but,
Padre
but
Pio had it. He had it. He had the hidden stigmata as well.
he did, and then he had visible stigmata for 50 years. And in some cases with, for example, Catherine of Siena and Faustina, they asked the Lord, they begged the Lord, please keep them hidden, right? To keep me from the sin of pride. They didn't want people to see it. And plus too, because of the way that they were, they had their doubters all the time, right? They were always being mocked, made fun of, Faustina among the other nuns. And so for people not to actually see the wounds that she was bearing was a further cross that she had to bear, very much kind of symptomatic of the consistent spiritual suffering that they went through. But in most cases, they're visible. Yeah, yeah.
Majority women. That was a fascinating stat. What is that like? Majority women and some Protestants are on the list as well. What is that? How do we interpret that?
Yeah, the vast majority are women, which is kind of ironic given that the first were men, right? Possibly Paul, definitely Francis. Padre Pio is the most well known of the stigmatists, as he's a male, but the vast majority have been women, over 90%. By the way, and from countries of origin, the majority have been Italy. About 70% have been from Italy. But if you were going to pick like a kind of a prototypical demographic or whatever, it would be an Italian woman, somebody like Catherine of Siena, Sister Elena Aiello, who I talk about in the book. She's one of the names. She might be the longest chapter of the book. She's one of those names of somebody who died recently in 1960s. People don't even know about her. And one of my favorites, Saint Gemma Galgani, 1878 to 1903, only 25 years old. Fascinating stigmatist, Italian woman. I quote a number of different authorities in the book, including a spiritual advisor to Padre Pio, who said they think that women are simply more capable of suffering and sacrificing in a loving way, sharing their pain than men are. And I must say here, I agree. when when one of our kids or one of our babies in the middle of the night was waking up crying, I'll just turn over on my side and go back to sleep, my wife just jumps up and, like, salutes and runs, bolts into the room. But yeah, I think women are kind of, better at that suffering than men, and it's probably surely no coincidence why, so many of them have been women.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess this, the stories of, as I call them, the usual suspects, they're great ones. St. Francis, amazing. St. Padre Pio, amazing. Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich. Oh my heavens, her visions, and that's a big part of what you have in the book here is, their gifts, their visions, their warnings. Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich, I mean, she's got the entire life of the Holy Family in her visions. And I like to read those to my kids because they're so detailed, and some have said they're pious fiction, as far as the category is concerned. In your research, because it did seem like you were trying to be somewhat cautious and careful because there's some grayness in some of this stuff. How did you decide to pick this list to profile versus, say, others when you have 400 or 500 to choose from?
Yeah, so I try to stay with church approved, right? In the sense of saints or blesseds. So I don't have a chapter on Therese Newman. I do have a chapter on Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich, a chapter on Blessed Sister Elena Aiello, who was a little Calabrian nun who lived in the 20th century, who had amazing predictions and visions. And the others are all saints, right? So I have individual chapters on Saint Faustina, Francis, Padre Pio, Gemma Galgani, Catherine of Siena. Catherine of Siena is on the cover, right? She's the cover girl. In fact, picking a cover for this book, Joe, was fun because there's so much great artwork, and and photos. I mean, we considered a photo of Padre Pio, but we're kind of afraid that if we pick Padre Pio, then he might sort of dominate a little bit, right? And there's great artwork of Saint Francis. Obviously, no pictures of Saint Francis because he lived, 12th, 13th century. But Catherine of Siena, there's just some beautiful artwork of Catherine of Siena, and the cover illustration of her with her arms outstretched, kind of like a crucifix, and the rays of light coming. The rays of light are coming from the crucifix, and at that moment, she's getting struck with the stigmata. Very similar to what happened to Saint Francis of Assisi and what happened to Padre Pio. In both cases, they're in front of a crucifix. Yeah, yeah.
It is beautiful, and the stories are amazing. But there were, especially with Padre Pio, because I'm so familiar with him for sure. He had a lot of detractors. You have a whole section on him about his detractors on his chapter. But I wonder, is there a common thread here when it comes to the detractors of each of these stories? I mean, do they have, some said, well, they're faking it. Some said it's diabolical in its core. Some said, they're looking for attention. Some said it's a psychosis of some kind. So I'm wondering, was there a thread here of the detractors of each of their stories?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, at the start of the book, I go through different commonalities among the stigmatists, right? And and one of them is this kind of preparatory period of suffering before they get the stigmata, right? So it's almost as if God is testing them, right? Jesus is testing them to see, will you be able to accept the stigmata, right? Will you be able to suffer like this? And part of the suffering is not just the physical pain, but the detractors, the doubters. In fact, Padre Pio said that he had far worse suffering from men in the church, clergy in the church, who doubted him, called him a liar, tormented him with their doubts. And some of these, Joe, some of these claims from different detractors in the church or even medical personnel are laughable. They really are. In fact, they would say with Padre Pio, a few people said that he caused these. So first of all, they doubt that the wounds exist. And then they go in and see them and they look at them and they're like, wow, the guy's bleeding from his hands. Wow, how's he doing this? So then they bandage him up and it makes it even worse. And then they accuse him of using, like, acid to do it, right? It's obviously not true. He's not using acid. They can't find acid anywhere. And by the way, you couldn't use acid on the palms of your hands for 50 years like this, right? And so then after they go through all of that, then they accuse him of, like, gouging him, and he's like, "You think I'm gouging my hands? I can't even close one hand fully," right? He had trouble doing consecrating the Eucharist because he couldn't fully close his hands altogether. And so then after all of that, then they come in with the psychological explanations, right? And he had one cardinal in the church who really, Gemelli, who really tormented him and was just awful. I mean, really awful with the things he said. And he and others tried to accuse Pio of what they called auto-suggestion, right? And I gotta laugh out loud as I hear this, right? Auto-suggestion, right? It's like, okay, auto-suggestion. What am I doing there? Well, you see, if you take Freud and you take so and so and so and so, you are imagining this, and you're and Pio said at one point, tell so and so to imagine that he's a bull and let's see if he sprouts horns from his head. All right. I mean, it's just laughable. Auto suggestion for 50. That is a greater leap of faith than believing that Christ could give you the stigmata of all things. But Pio really went through a hell on earth with his detractors in the church. Yeah.
You're in the intro. I just thought about this too, about the nails through the palms or the wrist. You gave a great response to that. In fact, you even say something that I don't know why it never dawned on me before. I never consulted Thomas the Doubter on the argument. Like, the mentions in the gospel the hand versus the wrist. Like, I don't know why I never thought of that before, but I thought that was a very, very great response to that argument. Can you maybe summarize that for us?
Yeah, so a lot of people today are saying, well, yeah, they can't be stigmatists with holes in their palms because Jesus was crucified through the wrists, right? And I don't know why that's picked up. There are some people that claim in the Shroud of Turin, it looks like he's bleeding from the wrists. Now, of course, you could bleed from the palms, and the blood would obviously rush down to the wrists. They'd run all the way down your arm. So you could have blood on the shroud from there as well. And some have said, well, if you read the Greek or whatever, hands are meant to include wrists, right? Really? But either way, Jesus says to Thomas, the doubter, right? And Thomas says, unless I could see him and put my hands through my fingers through the holes in his hands, he doesn't say unless I could shove my fingers through his wrists. And Jesus doesn't say, Thomas, look, here's my bony wrists. Okay, put your fingers through my wrists. That's not what he's saying. I mean, he's saying the palms, and so it clearly seems to be coming from the palms. And either way, I mean, I suppose it's I don't know how you would bleed from your wrists too if you were given the stigmata by God, right? I mean, people commit suicide by slicing their wrists. It's like an instantaneous bleeding to death, right? So if God was going to bestow the gift of stigmata, I think he would have to choose to do it through the palms rather than through the wrists.
I want to talk about the 3 days of darkness, which I was surprised to find in your book, the whole section on the 3 days of darkness. Now, did you include that because so many of the visions of these stigmatists included this prophecy of the 3 days of darkness? And what were your conclusions?
Yeah, it's one of the reasons I did the book, Joe, was I was not only fascinated by people who bore these marks of Christ, but they were visionaries, and many of them had prophecies. And there's a lot of consistency in the prophecies, especially about days of darkness, and in some cases, 3 days of darkness. And this would include Sister Faustina Kowalska, um, little Sister Elena Aiello. I think people are going to be really, really kind of shocked and maybe a little terrified when they read some of what this little nun had to say. And I should note here, we're talking only about a month after the sudden unexpected death of Sister Agnes, who was the Our Lady of Akita seer in Japan. And she's the one who in 1973, 51 years ago, had some incredible prophecies and visions about clergy against clergy, final days, her and a number of others, right? Fireball from the sky, end times. But she had the stigmata. She had the stigmata, and her visions are actually approved by the Bishop of Akita. And if you read the Bishop of Akita's formal statement on approving her visions, he notes too that she had the stigmata. I don't think she had them all the way through to the end of her life. I think she had him for a limited period of time, although it's kind of mysterious. We don't know what the state of her body was at the end of her life. And I've read a number of different reports that her body at the time of its death was even donated to science by the authorities in Japan, which is very troubling if that's the case. I mean, she ought to be carefully taken care of by the church for incorruptibility and to examine if she still had wounds and all sorts of things. I don't know what's going on there. But a number of them had prophecies of days of darkness, 3 days of darkness. Maybe the most significant is the first saint of the new millennium, Sister Faustina Kowalska, who, as I said, died at the age of 33, 1938. John Paul II approved her. She's canonized. Her diary, and she says in her diary that Jesus told her this in August 1934, quote, write this, before I come as the just judge, I am coming first as the King of mercy. Before the day of justice arrives, there will be given to people a sign in the heavens of this sort. All light in the heavens will be extinguished, and there will be great darkness over the whole earth. And then Christ said that he himself would penetrate the darkness. Then the sign of the cross will be seen in the sky, and from the openings where the hands and the feet of the Savior were nailed, right? Almost like the rays coming from the cross and giving the stigmata to Catherine of Siena, to Francis, to Padre Pio. From there will come great lights, which will light up the earth for a period of time. This will take place shortly before the last day. But she talks in there, and then she says, the great lights, the days of darkness. I'll give you another quote here. This is, I'll contrast this or put this alongside of a Good Friday vision, April 16th, 1954, from Sister Elena Aiello, Blessed Elena Aiello. And she got this vision from the Blessed Virgin Mary, she claimed. Clouds with lightning flashes of fire in the sky, and a tempest of fire shall fall upon the whole world. This terrible, terrible scourge, never before seen in the history of humanity, will last 70 hours. All right, it's pretty close to 3 days, right? 72 would be 3 days. Godless persons will be crushed and wiped out. Many will be lost because they will remain in their obstinacy of sin. Then shall be seen the power of light over the power of darkness. So you have a number of these, and I quote them in the final chapter of the book. One of the reasons why I did this book, Joe, is I was reading these things online. Often they're not documented well. They're very sloppy. And I started trying to find out for myself. So I said, all right, let me find some books on Blessed Sister Elena Aiello. I have Sister Faustina's diary. We all do, right? And so I got it. I got an Italian. I got English translations. I went back to old documents that I could find. University of Dayton is one of the only places that has periodicals that have some of these predictions that she had in the English language. And I wanted to see, did she really say these things? Did she really say? And she did. She did. So I want to know what these people are saying to us about end times, days of darkness, times that I think very likely we're probably living in. I'm not going to say it's now or this fall or next year, but it's kind of hard to imagine when you line up the dates. I mean, Jesus said to Sister Faustina, Saint Faustina, "You will prepare the world for my final coming." Right? So maybe we're in those times.
It does feel like the apocalyptic shoe is about to drop. I don't think you have to be a prophet or the son of one to come to some of these conclusions, but nonetheless, it is a great book, and I encourage everybody to check it out. It's called the Stigmatists: Their Gifts, Their Revelations, Their Warnings by Dr. Paul Kengore, published by tanbooks.com. We will put a link to it in the show notes for you today. But Dr. Paul Kengore, I really appreciate your time and your input, and thanks for being on to share the Stigmatists with us.
Anytime, Joe. Thanks for all you do.
Did you like that video? It's okay. You can admit it. It's perfectly fine. Hey, we cover the big stories of our day, from inside the church to outside the church to all points in between, and we do it from a Catholic perspective. It's called A Catholic Take. It's a radio program Monday through Friday. We live stream it right here on this channel, by the way, so make sure to subscribe, like, and share. We would be very grateful to you. And don't forget, you're going to want to watch this video right here because you don't want to miss anything.